Disclaimer: if you're easily offended by differing political opinions, then you should probably click off this video right now, because it's about to get heated. So I know what you're thinking. Harper, how are you going to teach Spanish through a YouTube video? The most efficient way to learn Spanish is through speaking, and you can't really do that through a YouTube video. Well, instead, I'm going to talk about history and customs of Spanish-speaking nations. All of Latin America, Spain, and I don't know if we'll get to Equatorial Guinea. Let's start with the motherland, Spain. The population is 74 million, and they have the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, and the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean. The earliest groups in the region were Greeks, Romans, Visigoths, Anglo-Saxons, and Celtics. The Visigoths called this land Hispania, and that's where we get the term Hispanic. Fast forward to about 711 AD, and we got Muslims in Spain. Muslims brought agricultural practices, construction, that was really cool. They also brought math, which is pretty darn awesome, and they contributed a lot to their language. Also, they gave them some herbs and spices, so that's pretty neat. Then Spain decided to fight a war against the Muslims, and they kicked them out in 1492. They also expelled Arabs, Jews, Gypsies, and other ethnicities. So then Spain became completely Catholic, and then the Spanish Inquisition happened, which was basically like the Salem witch trials. They converted others to Catholics, otherwise they would be executed. You know what else happened in 1492? Christopher Columbus discovered the New World. Also, he got a ton of resources and kinda started the whole smallpox thing. So, in the Treaty of Tordesillas between Spain and Portugal, Portugal gets control on the colonies in the Eastern Hemisphere, and Spain gets control of the Western Hemisphere. Spain's dominating the New World until 1790, when France decides to invade. Then all the Latin American nations start to fight for independence because Spain now has to fend off both those Latin American countries and France. So Spain's in trouble now. So Spain decides to let the countries have their independence and kick out France in the process. Fast forward about a century, and you got the Spanish-American War, which was one of the worst events in Spanish history. Spain lost control of Cuba, Guam, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. Fast forward to 1936 to 1939, where we got the Spanish Civil War. The Civil War caused a bunch of social conflict, and it really worsened the economy. But Spain decided to stay out of World War II because their economy was already bad enough, so they wouldn't be much of a help to either side. One event in the Civil War, the bombing of Guernica, was depicted by Picasso's painting called Guernica. It showed the pain, suffering, and horrors of war. You want to know who won the Civil War? Well, it was General Francisco Franco's regime, which was pretty repressive and brutal, and he ruled until 1975. Fast forward to today, and the present leader of Spain is Rey Felipe, who is just a figurehead, does not make laws, much like the Queen of England. Problems that Spain has to deal with today: how about unemployment and immigration? However, Spain does thrive when it comes to industry, agriculture, tourism, and they have some of the most efficient healthcare in the world. By the way, whatever happened to Cuba once Spain gave it independence? Well, let's go back to the beginning. 1868 to 1878, they fought for their independence and failed. That fight was led by Jose Marti, who was kind of seen as the figurehead of Cuba in the future after his death. Then the Spanish-American War, they were protected by the U.S. from 1898 to 1920. And then they got their independence. Then they had a line of repressive dictators, started by dictator Machado in 1924, followed by dictator Batista in 1944. Dictators in between were pretty forgettable, so don't worry about them. Then in 1959, there was the Cuban Revolution that was led by Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. We will get to that in a later episode of history. Fidel Castro forged an alliance with the USSR, and then the U.S. put an embargo on the oil supply, so now the U.S. and Cuba are sworn enemies, especially after that Cuban Missile Crisis. I said we'll get to that in a later history episode, okay? Be patient. By the way, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the embargo, and the Bay of Pigs invasion all caused an immigration exodus to the U.S. These people were called balseros, or rafters. because they were on rafts. Fast forward to 2006, and Fidel Castro hands over power to his brother Raul Castro. Also, they ended their embargo with the US in 2015, and in 2016 Fidel Castro died. So how would Cuba be right now? Well, they have free education and free healthcare, even though it's not technologically advanced. They also have a lower amount of violence, so that's good. Because they're communist, they have established salaries, which means the profession is not really important to your salary. They also have, let's see, high unemployment, rations of food, lack of clean water, lack of technology and infrastructure, and they even have a black market for food. When your country has a black market for food, that's when you know there needs to be some changes. Now let's talk about Hispaniola, or Haiti and the Dominican Republic, sharing an island together. Before Columbus arrived, there were tons of indigenous groups, one of which was called the Caribe, who practiced cannibalism. The Taínos were the largest group of indigenous people, but there wasn't really a huge civilization. Fast forward to 1492, where Columbus arrives to the island and establishes San Salvador. In 1493, the year after, he establishes Santo Domingo, which is now the capital of the Dominican Republic. You all know the story. He called the natives Indians because he thought he was in India. He was looking for spices, but he didn't find spices. Instead, he found lots of precious metals, animals, vegetation, lots of food. He also discovered different ethnicities and ways of life, so you know what he decided to do? Destroy those ways of life entirely.
Disclaimer, Project E does not condone the use of ethnic cleansing.
The indigenous people kind of tried to rebel, but the colonists already established their own government and way of life. The most staggering statistic of this is, in 10 years, 90% of the native population died because of colonialism. The ones who survived were usually enslaved, and some committed suicide, and it's just terrible. Good news for the colonists. The Caribbean is now the key to the New World. Bad news, there's a bunch of pirates that are wanting to rebel and take their stuff. They enslaved Africans until 1873, and they grew sugar, cotton, and tobacco, and raised livestock. Now let's talk about the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and their time together on their island of Hispaniola. Spoiler alert, it was super violent. In 1822, Haiti invades the island and takes control of Hispaniola. 22 years later, the Dominican Republic gains their independence from Haiti, making it the only Latin American country not to get its independence from Spain. Fast forward to the early 20th century, it was occupied by the US until 1924, when a revolution broke out for 6 years. When the revolution finally ended, the dictator Trujillo took over. Trujillo, like most dictators, was very brutal and repressive, and in 1937 he caused a massacre of thousands of Haitians. But then in 1961, Trujillo was assassinated. The year after, the US invades the Dominican Republic, and it is now down. However, just 3 years ago, they engaged in the deportation of Haitian descendants. Finally, let's talk about the history of Mexico. Our scene starts in 1325, where the Aztecs have control of the Mexican region. Their capital is present-day Mexico City, or Tenochtitlan. I'll just put that word up there. As you know, they engaged in human sacrifice, and they would often call their victims flowers or offerings. One of their emperors, Montezuma, was killed for an unknown reason we still don't know today. Their symbol is the eagle on a cactus eating a snake, and they were kind of advanced in relation to the rest of the world. As you know, Spain killed 90% of the natives, and it's horrible. Cortez arrived in Mexico City, and he was seen as a god to the natives. Then in 1520, the Aztecs found out that Cortez was not in fact a god, so they were like, "You lied to us!" And then the Spaniards escaped with their gold. They just got out of here. 600 Spaniards were not so lucky as they were killed by the Aztecs. 10 years later, there's a spiritual conquest of the Aztecs. They were converted to Catholicism, and that was kind of part of the whole Spanish Inquisition thing. It ended sacrifice, introduced slavery, and also built a bunch of plantations. 3 centuries later, or almost 3 centuries later, In 1810, Mexico declares their independence. The Declaration of Independence was given out by the priest Miguel Hidalgo, who was a Creole, which meant he was Spanish with children in the New World. Also, they ended slavery in 1813. In 1992, the US, Mexico, Canada, basically most of North America agreed on the North American Free Trade Agreement, and that allowed the countries to trade without any tariffs. This agreement hurt small business owners, but it improved corporations, and it also lowered the need for agriculture. This would lead to more use of cheap labor, and would lead to the development of maquiladoras, or sweatshops with children workers. This severely increased Mexico's poverty rate to almost half. In 2000, Mexico has their first Democratic president, Vicente Fox. He made some education reforms and gave economic aid to senior citizens. In 2006, the next president, Felipe Calderón, started the war on drugs. Drug cartels started to take control. Assassinations, disappearances, kidnappings, those became more common in Mexico. Enough of that, let's get to the next president. In 2012, Mexico elected Enrique Peña Nieto. He was kind of the worst president out of the three. He was very corrupt, and he threatened to fire professors and doctors. Let's see how the economy was. Let's see what the poverty rate was when he was president. 60%. Also, he used the taxes that he received for his own personal benefit. He built a huge house, and it could hold like 200 members. Meanwhile, in the town of Ayotzinapa, 43 teachers have been declared missing. Mexico also has problems with drug trafficking and the government violating human rights. In 2014, the government literally ordered the disappearance of over 40 students. So next time you plan on calling a government corrupt, keep in mind that Mexico's government is plenty corrupt. This has been Harper Cates, and I will see you next time.
Which subject are we gonna teach next?
Spin the wheel to find out. Next time on Project E!